You're listening to the Veterans Heritage Hour on the Vets on Media Network.
Good morning, Arizona, and welcome to our listeners from around the world. My name is Joe Brett.
And David Lucier.
And this is the Veterans Heritage Hour. And David, we have some guests coming up this month. Before we introduce today's all-star guest, the best 40 under 40.
Yes, he is.
And the top 10 of personalities in Arizona. But for the rest of the month, for June, we have coming either into the studio or over our phone-in capabilities. Congressman Ruben Gallego has said he would be on.
A Marine, a Iraq War veteran.
And a trigger puller from Harvard. I mean, come on. He went to Harvard and went in the Marine Corps as an enlisted man from Harvard. So
in that order.
He
graduated from Harvard and then enlisted in the Marine Corps and found himself in Fallujah in, I think, 04, 05.
Wow. So that's a great guest, and we'll learn how. We were just talking with Corey, our guest today, that, Vietnam was supposed to be the exception to the rule of going to bad wars, but it seems to be the rule. So what does a congressman now who's been in that situation, how does he feel about it? And we're going to ask Corey Harris the same. But then we have two great students.
Young scholars.
Young scholars.
Yes, sir.
Yes. We have Ashley Durham and Alec Griffin. Calling in are going to be in the studio, and they're students who have interviewed veterans, and because of that interviewing process and the skills they've learned, and they've gone on to great educations, and we want them to speak about the things that they have learned.
In fact, I think Ashley's doing a little bit of stringer work for the New York Times.
Because of her involvement with Veterans Heritage. Yeah, she's
Yeah.
right. And Alec is now at UCLA, and Ashley is a Barrett Honors College student at ASU, and they're great spokespersons for the benefit of the entire Veterans Heritage Project. And then we have Rich Carmona.
Last but not least, Rich Carmona, former Green Beret, combat veteran, highly decorated, born into poverty and joined the Army, went to Vietnam, wounded a couple of times, highly decorated, and eventually went through the medical schooling system and then on to be the 17th U.S. Surgeon General.
And a great guy, a humble, wonderful, I hate to use a cliche, but what you want your heroes to be is a guy like Rich Carmona.
And a great storyteller.
Who's got, and a great example for all of us. So we're looking forward for June, and then we have other guests coming on, but we'll get to that later. So why don't you introduce our guest today? You're putty here.
Well, I'm really pleased, honored, and proud to introduce Mr. Corey Harris. Corey has got a great story. He two tours to Iraq, both combat tours. Once as a junior enlisted, and then as a newly minted second lieutenant.
Ouch.
But I think it gives him a great perspective on that. He worked for the former Congressman Harry Mitchell. And was an integral part of bringing about the post 9/11 GI Bill on a federal level. Corey also helped with helping to pass our own in-state tuition bill here in Arizona, one of the first in the nation to do that. And now it's been federally adopted.
So anybody who's a veteran comes to Arizona can get in-state tuition rates.
Yes, and they have been able to do that for 4 years. Mm-hmm. Which has been a magnificent program and really, really helpful. Our student population in our universities have about quadrupled over 4 years, and that's part of the reason.
All because of Corey Harris.
Corey Harris was all part of that.
What a guy!
He was named the one of the community leaders of 40 under 40 by the Phoenix Business Journal. I believe that was the journal.
Do we have any 70 and under awards?
We're pushing for that right now. So
we're 70 and above next year, man.
Quick,
we got to be in there.
But he also was instrumental in coordinating ending the chronic homelessness for veterans in the city of Phoenix. And
That's quite an accomplishment, quite frankly.
And did
Carl.
magnificent.
Thank you.
Wow.
Did
I didn't do it on my
magnificent
own.
work. Did magnificent work with the Madison Street Veterans Association, Madhouse.
And the mayor was pretty stand up without the whole thing too. I believe, if I can read the press releases.
I couldn't agree more. He
Okay.
did a great job and
Okay.
really led the fight on that.
So Corey Harris, why don't you give us a little bit of backgrounder on where you
Started from let's go from
Is-
Brophy High School, man.
From Brophy High School forward.
Brophy is a big high school here in Arizona.
We got about 20 minutes, a little less than 20 minutes to go through the bio portion, but
Yeah.
we'll probably take that pretty quickly. And so just give us a little background or tell us a little bit about how you came to do 2 tours in Iraq.
Well, first off, Joe and David, thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I love your show, and I'm privileged to be on it.
Well,
Thank you.
You're the 40 under 40, man. You're the best. So we're honored to have you.
Thank you. So a little bit of background. I did start at Brophy High School, which is for those who don't know, it's a Jesuit Catholic high school, all boys here in Phoenix. And if there was one thing that I really took away from it that led me to being in the military, it was a focus on service. Anybody that knows the Jesuits, that's their big focus. I mean, they've got a bunch of rich kids that are going to school there, and they try to keep them humble. Add in a little dash of Catholic guilt, and hopefully you do something good with your money down the road, right?
Catholic guilt is the gift that keeps on giving.
That's right. It never goes away.
Right.
So
Says the 3 Catholic boys sitting
Right.
here.
Right. Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny?
So true. And so then it was probably around 1997. I remember I just hadn't been involved in my community. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do in college. I hit that point where I'd taken all the fun classes I could. And
This was at NAU, Northern Arizona.
it was.
University.
That's right. Up in Flagstaff.
Man, I love that town. That's a town a guy could have fun in.
That's the problem. Yes,
Yeah.
I had way too much fun.
I resemble that remark.
No, it was a great city, a great community, and I loved going to school there. But I just remember hitting that point where I said I need to get back in my community and do something that assuages that Catholic guilt.
Assuages, come on.
That's a Brophy word. Sorry.
I went to Franciscans. We didn't use that word. To Franciscan
Christian
institution.
brothers were real basic.
Yeah, right. We didn't assuage us. I didn't get that one. So
The Jesuits were the nerds of the Catholic community, to be fair.
yeah.
But yeah, so then I joined in 1998, and that was, of course, Clinton years before we had any wars going on, and it was most definitely a different time. I remember telling my mom, "Don't worry, I'm joining the National Guard. The National Guard never gets deployed." And of course, that didn't appease her, if that's a better word than assuage. So I told her, "Don't worry, I'm a truck driver. Truck drivers, as a National Guardsman, I'm going to stay here. Maybe I would deploy to Germany and backfill a unit that goes to war.
Sure.
And worst case scenario, if there's a war and I actually get deployed to the war, which wouldn't happen, by the way, I would be in the back lines, maybe dropping off some supplies at the front and then just hightailing it home."
Sure.
So, Mom, don't worry, it'll be
Never mind.
fine.
That's your story too, isn't it?
The
Adam?
Birdman shaking his
The
head. He's doing the
Birdman.
hungry chicken.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah.
So we all know what happened in Iraq.
So how did you, from a truck driving MOS, get into were you driving a truck in Iraq?
I was driving what's commonly referred to as a PLS. That's a 10-wheel vehicle with a big pallet on the back that drops off. And we would, so then I was over at ASU and transferred down there. I was in ROTC, and they called us and let us know that all of our unit was deploying. And back then, I think it's still the same now.
So you were in the National Guard as an E3 or 4,
E4 at the time, yeah.
and then you were in ROTC at ASU,
That's right.
and then your unit gets called up,
Right.
and you get deployed to Iraq. What year was this?
So that was 2003, but I wasn't supposed to be deployed.
Uh-huh.
As an ROTC cadet, you're supposed to stay in until you graduate, and it took some wrangling. In fact, my what do you call them?
Advisor?
The advisors, yeah, the military advisors there said, "We're going to make sure you never become an officer if you leave this program to go enlisted." Well, everything I'd ever heard about officers, the best ones were those with enlisted experience deploying to war. So I said, "Well, I'm going anyway," and there was my deployment to Iraq.
And what did you do in Iraq, and where were you?
I was stationed at Camp Spiker, which is it's a little north of Baghdad, just beyond Tikrit, Saddam's hometown.
Oh, wow.
and we drove out of there. We also went to, we had a satellite unit that went out to Camp Anaconda, and that was a little bit east and south of where we were. Big base out there. And all we did was drive supplies day and night, had missions every single day. And that went for the entire year, 365 days that we were there.
Was that IED land that you were traveling through?
There was. Luckily, we were, my unit was lucky enough that we brought everybody home despite a few incidences with IEDs and a few attacks. There were a lot of the transportation units out there that weren't so lucky. And I'll be honest, I'm just happy that we weren't
that land that you were in north of Baghdad, that's now being contested by the ISIL, and it's all fudged up between the Sunnis and the Shiites in their battle, isn't it? That's a crazy place now.
That's right. And it's tough to even think about that place that we worked so hard to take care of is now, it's been overrun.
We'll get into that in a minute because of when you went back overseas, you come out of there, go back to ASU, finish up ROTC.
That's right.
And then,
You mean they let you back in the program?
Yeah. Well, I had, it helps to know people. I had a general at the National Guard who, General Greg Maxson, actually, who then advocated for me when I got to talk to him about it. And he said, I will make sure that you get to go back and become an officer. And he called up the commander the moment I got back and said, you will let Specialist Corey Harris back into the ASU.
I didn't realize that.
that seemed like
I didn't realize that Greg had stepped up like that.
Yeah,
That's
he's a
fantastic.
great guy.
He really is.
But that's foolish. You would think that the Army would love to have a guy, as an officer who volunteered to go. I mean, you can't, that's initiative. You should not stifle initiative, and that colonel, whomever, recognized that.
Yeah, that colonel who shall remain nameless. I guess he had some numbers to take care of and didn't want to lose anybody, and was worried that he was going to lose all of his cadets to being deployed.
Oh, and a lot of them were. So when you got your commission, were you commissioned in the Guard?
I was. Well, actually, I switched over to the Army Reserves because they had civil affairs. Honestly, if it wasn't for civil affairs, I wouldn't have stayed in the military. I would have done my 6 and 2 and gotten out. But I got to work with some civil affairs units during that first deployment. And I'll tell you, I got the bug. I loved it and couldn't wait to become a civil affairs officer.
So now you're Second Lieutenant Corey Harris and in the reserves, and you have to pack up and leave for Iraq again.
Right. Right after graduation. So now we're looking at 2008. I deployed with my civil affairs unit.
From the Arizona Guard or Reserves?
Well, this was switched over to the Army Reserves because
Okay.
they were the only ones that had
Okay,
civil
good.
affairs.
I hear you.
So went over there with my team of 3 people, and everybody knows the difficulty of second lieutenants getting respect. I also look like I'm 12, so they just assumed I'm fresh off the boat, even though I was an E5 before I switched over and had a deployment. And something interesting about civil affairs, it was typically captains that would be civil affairs team leaders, because my job was to advise the infantry lieutenant colonel on the civilian impact of what he was doing and to tell him what he should do in the local area to make sure that he was taking care of the civilian population. Now you imagine a second lieutenant trying to tell a colonel, hey sir, you might not want to knock down that door, and let me tell you why. It was a little challenging to have them listen to me right off the bat.
When I was a second lieutenant, I was told that the most dangerous person in the world was a second lieutenant with a clipboard.
That's the truth.
Gosh, that's an awful rank. But the nice thing about that rank is that every general and every admiral and everybody above this rank had to be a second lieutenant at one time. And gosh, they just throw you right in, don't they? I mean, you would just have to learn by doing it. You're just thrown in.
That was it. We were just thrown in.
Yeah.
And it was a mission that had expanded just before I deployed to where civil affairs is usually, in very hot spots. It's basically casualty management and helping out with, refugee camps. And when it's a little bit more advanced, kind of a medium conflict level, then you're typically working on public works projects like water treatment plants and building schools. And they always talked about us being, beanie babies and soccer balls. That was our initial mission.
There's some psyops in there too. Isn't there some psychological warfare there can be attached to that?
Yeah, we worked with them. We weren't with them all the time. It just depended on, how the infantry commander decided he wanted to deploy his civil affairs team.
So you were out meeting and greeting the people of Iraq.
Right. Well, and that's the point. This last piece, when I got there, we were starting to help out with governance. Now, this was something that we weren't trained to do
Because we
at all.
were not building government.
Right.
The Republican, we're not nation builders, we're warriors. Remember that debate?
We were advising. We
were
were
advising.
mentoring and advising was the proper term.
We were kicking down doors, man. We weren't nation building.
Right. So the trick was we had to go in, and I remember this in civil affairs school. We had one of our civil affairs teachers tell us, I went in and the area that I was in, this province in Iraq, they didn't have a constitution. So I just took the North Carolina Constitution, state constitution, translated it into Arabic, and said, "Hey, we're good to go."
So all the black people in that region couldn't vote, right? Sorry, that hurt. That was a low blow. That wasn't proper. I don't.
Let's just say it didn't translate well. How about that? So yeah, that was what we were working with. And luckily I had a background in political science, and I worked with the State Department guys to help mentor these governments and set up a metric for evaluating a civilian government that got adopted throughout that whole part of northeastern Baghdad by our other civil affairs teams.
Did they buy in? Did the civilians really like this and enjoy it? I mean, did they see some buy-in, or were the Constitution? Was this something that was kind of new to them? Of course.
Yes. It was a
there
challenge.
Was there some excitement for it, though? Did they see the benefit of having a working constitution or something? Was that at the village level? Did you find it that kind of a favorable opinion emerging from those folks?
Some yes, some no.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always hard to tell if somebody really likes you if you're talking to them while you got a sidearm holstered.
Yeah.
If they're just smiling because you're the guy with a gun, or if it's
You got the 9 mil on the table.
Yeah.
right. You want democracy, right? Oh yes.
Then
You wouldn't lie to me, right? Oh la. No. I've never lied to you. That being said, we did some polls through a local contracting group, and we found, like I'm sure you would imagine, you had people that were more future-minded, that saw it as a benefit, and you had more traditionalists, especially the people that were in power there, that a lot of them saw it as an attack on their power. So it was
What tribes were these? Were all Sunnis? Mostly you were with, or Shiites?
both Sunni and Shia. We had two main kind of sub-tribes of the Sunni and Shia in our area, and worked with both of them, and that was always a challenge, trying to balance that out and make that work.
Were they living in the same villages, or was one village Shia and the other Sunni? Were they?
They were, well, the two main villages were Sunni and Shia, but we also had the town of Husseiniya, which was an Iraq officers retirement base for the Shia.
No kidding.
Yeah. And we had a few other areas that we worked on where it was more mixed than others.
And last but not least here, you had a third deployment coming up.
I did.
Yeah, there you go. So why don't you give us a little background around that one?
Yeah, that was I was deploying again as a civil affairs officer in 2012, and as I was getting ready to deploy, we were all in New Jersey at Fort Dix. We were training up, and being from Arizona, I'm not familiar with what goes on in New Jersey. Specifically, they have this thing called snow and ice. It's white, evidently, and slippery. So on the day where I told my soldiers, "Hey guys, it's the first snow. Make sure you don't fall. We can't lose anybody." Sure enough, I'm the idiot who slips on the ice and fractures my ankle and gets sent home.
Wow. And that saved you from your third tour.
That's what my mom would say. Yeah, she was very happy that I fractured my ankle.
Well, the gods of war are fickle, aren't they? I mean, did anything happen? Was it a nice? Did anything untoward happen towards your unit?
No, everybody came back okay. There were a couple
good.
of attacks, but no one was injured.
Well, that makes you feel better then, of course. You don't
Absolutely
miss out on something. Listen, we're going to be pausing here for a short break, and we're with Corey Harris. And when we come back, Corey's going to tell us about what happened after, of course, his tour, but what he felt about it and what he feels now, because there's a lot of debate going on about our involvement in Iraq in the first instance and what's going to happen with ISIL and all those issues. And he also played in the political arena with working for a congressman. And so he knows somewhat of the inside of how these decisions are made. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Veterans Heritage Hour.
Everyone's going to need an attorney at some point in their life. I'm no different. Hey, everyone, it's James from Vets On. whether it was my last will and testament before deployment or my ongoing custody battle for my children during my divorce. I needed help, so I lawyered up. If you need help, I urge you to contact Capstrom Law Firm. Capstrom Law Firm in Springfield, Missouri services clients throughout the state in criminal law, personal injury, and family law. With over 13 years practicing law, Tom Capstrom understands both law and court procedures and how stressful they can be. Let Tom Capstrom Law Firm and his dedicated staff take the stress and worry out of a difficult situation by calling him today. We feel so strong about the work that Tom and his staff are doing that he'll be a monthly guest on the show. Tom is a veteran and a listener, for God's sake, so you know the guy is solid and will fight for you. Give Tom a call today by calling 417-864-0552 or email Tom at capstromlaw.com. And don't forget to tell him that Vets On sent you.
The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely upon advertising.
If you or someone you know is looking for a new job or career, you need to visit the pros. National Career Fairs at ncfairs.com. National Career Fairs hosts over 300 career fairs a year nationwide. The events are free and give you the perfect chance to meet some of the top employers in your area face to face. To find the nearest career fair to you, visit ncfairs.com. Again, that's ncfairs.com. What are you waiting for?
Veterans served us, now it's time we serve them. As a veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as a current military member deployed abroad, I would like to take a minute of your time to tell you about Patriot Hills of New York. Patriot Hills of New York is a nonprofit organization providing support to veterans and their families. They partner veterans in need with over 65 health and wellness organizations, community groups, as well as philanthropic foundations providing no or low-cost services. They've helped over 400 veterans through confidential referral services, assistance with veterans issues, employment placement, as well as educational opportunities. If you need assistance or just want to help veterans by donating your time or services, contact them at info@patriothills.org. Again, that's info@patriothills.org. Visit patriothillsnewyork.com for more information about their services or how you can donate. Our veterans deserve no less. We can give it to them, and you can help.
You're listening to the Veterans Heritage Hour on the Vets On Media Network.
Hey, we're back with Corey Harris, Iraq veteran and veterans advocate now, who's gotten involved with politics here locally and I think he's an all-star, having had experience like he has had. I was back in Albany, New York after Vietnam and got involved with starting a chapter for Vietnam veterans, and I got involved with the Agent Orange issue. And so I have an admiration for what you're doing here in the community, both you and David, because it's, and I admire you both because you're much more mature in how to handle all these issues than I may have been back when I was trying it. So it's a challenge, and to be successful at it, it's very rewarding. So I admire that in you, Corey. You got back, and how did you then get involved with politics or in the political governance arena here? It came right from civil affairs work, I would think.
It certainly helped. Working with the tribes and the politics there. I'll tell you, I got the bug. I loved it. It was always difficult and challenging, but that's part of what made it exciting.
Sure.
So, and like I said, I was a political science student back at home. I decided that was the route that I wanted to go. And that actually came out of dealing with some veterans after my first deployment. I remember coming home to, if you can bear with me for a second, a short story.
Sure.
Coming home to a parade in northern Arizona, ending up in Show Low, where this was 2004, so we didn't expect that there was going to be anything. They drove us through all the streets of all the little towns, and they must have shut those towns down because everybody was out lining the streets as we were going through.
Deuce Club Boulevard in Show Low, Arizona.
That's right.
I lived up there for a couple of years.
So yeah, right. Isn't everything named after gambling up there?
Yeah, Deuce Club.
Just about.
Pretty much.
Yep.
Yeah. So as we ended up at the Armory in Show Low, it was a VFW that we ended up at. And I remember that I hadn't had any experience with the VFW. And I remembered as we came in, we were being served food, and specifically by a guy who was wearing the Vietnam pin showing that he had service in Vietnam. And most people were smart enough not to say anything, but I'm the idiot that goes, so it must have been a lot different for you when you came back. And he paused as he's putting one of the sandwiches down, and says to us that he joined with one of his best friends back in the out of Flagstaff back in the late 60s, and they had deployed together to fight the communist threat. And they had, after 2 combat tours in Vietnam, they had come back to protests in Flagstaff. Well, one of those protesters, there were more than a few that were throwing rocks, and one of those errant rocks hit his friend in the head. He ended up going to the hospital and dying of his wounds.
Oh no!
As he had
Oh,
just come back
gosh.
from
That's
a tour in Vietnam.
terrible story.
Yeah, and it
God.
was, and he stops right there, and his eyes are welling up, and
Sure.
clearly he doesn't want to talk about it anymore. But he just sets the sandwich down and says, "Thank you for your service and welcome home."
Wow.
And to this day, I still remember that
That's a
feeling
story.
of this is what happens when you don't take care of and you don't honor the service of the people
Sure.
that are deploying.
Right.
And I'll tell you, that stuck with me, and
It'll stick with me now.
it gives me
Stick with all
chills
of
even
us.
saying it.
Yeah, it does.
I just remember, and I had a hard time, readjusting when I first got back and going. And I thought, as most veterans, I'm sure do, I can handle this, no big deal. And that's what we're taught in the military.
Nothing's wrong with me.
But it's
Suck it
like
up.
landing. It's like landing on another planet.
Right. Rub some dirt on it. You'll just be fine.
Yeah,
Except you can't
spit
really
on-
rub dirt on your brain.
Yeah, right.
So yeah. And then it was a social work professor at NAU that I was talking to that said, one of the things that you might want to look at is being involved in politics. If you really want to help veterans down the road, that's going, we don't have any social workers that want to be involved in the dirty business of politics. And of course, I put my hand up and said, I can do the dirty business. That works. So sure enough, that's where I ended up as a veterans advocate and working in various political arenas.
I think the admission that you have made, or probably you've seen both sides of the argument. I was on a mission, and I wanted the mission first without understanding the environment in which I was playing in. And I admire you both because you understand it's a give and take. It's politics and all that entails. And I was driven by the morality of it all. And that's tough to sustain because you have to have a point of view, but taking it through the political processes and the corruption and the Agent Orange part of it and all of that, it gets furry in there. It gets difficult to maintain your composure and your ideals in the midst of all of this. Was that problematic, or did you had a grasp of it up front? I think
It's still difficult because in the military we're taught about here's the objective and you do everything you can to get there, and come hell or high water, you just keep going. And the nuance of politics and of working with personalities and
words don't. Well, your word is not necessarily your body. Your word is as good as.
That's the hardest thing.
That's the hardest thing for
Right.
veterans is that you talk to a guy and he says he's going to be somewhere or do something, and you expect that there's going to be, in the military, man, that guy better stand up or he's gone, right? Or you better stand up. And when you find out that is not the currency in the political arena, that's tough.
And being straightforward.
Oh.
That's you're used to.
Yeah.
If someone, a commander or peer says, doesn't like what you just had to say, they certainly let you know. In
Sure.
politics, they just smile and go, interesting point.
Yeah, that's
And you don't find out until a month later that
That you've been
that
shown.
interesting point meant, wow, don't ever say that again.
But on this pathway, you eventually went to work for Congressman Harry Mitchell.
I did. I was very lucky to work for Congressman Mitchell. He was a massive advocate for veterans. In fact, he was one of the two primary people that pushed through the post 9/11 GI Bill.
And you helped work on that.
I did. The implementation of it. He had passed it just before I got in there. So once the bill was passed, part of my job was going around to schools and talk to veterans and veteran groups and asking them how we can improve the GI Bill, and taking those suggestions back to the congressman and working through how we can make this an effective piece of legislation.
Harry I met him. I'm a past president of the Scottsdale Sister City Association, and in the Sister Cities, Harry in the Tempe group, they did a high school teacher. He was the mayor of Tempe, and he got really involved with Sister Cities. And that Sister City in Tempe is something to be admired. They've done a great job, and so I've always aspired to be as good of a Sister Cities as Harry and the people of Tempe have been. But he was a history teacher, and he mentioned one time that when he got to Congress, it was nothing like he taught about. It was nothing like, the ideals and the principles he taught his students. It was something quite different. So he had to come to some analysis of how to survive in that environment.
It was a challenge. It's,
Yeah.
as much as, I mean, if there's anything that's, I think, not to get up on a soapbox, but true of America is that we don't have a shared heritage or a shared culture the way that, a lot of other nations might, based on, whether it's the way you look or
Yeah.
your religion or anything else. Our shared culture is our ideology.
Uh-huh.
So especially when we teach and talk about democracy and capitalism for that matter, this is our ideology, this is our shared culture, but we're all still human, and it's difficult in practice.
Sure.
And I think that's what Harry ran into, that the ideology of what we aspire to be as individuals, as humans, as a nation, it's tough to always reach that ideal.
And you ran for office too.
I did.
And the fellow, I just read an article, the guy who won that seat misrepresented his military background.
He did, and I'll tell you, that's I wish we'd known about it then. But that's one of the most frustrating things, I think, for all veterans. Every veteran you talk to, they've always got a story about someone who exaggerated their service or put on airborne wings or said, that they were in
But
combat when they actually weren't.
But that's the mortal sin of the brotherhood, right? If you steal the valor of someone else and pin some of that on yourself. I mean, poor what was the journalist Williams? I mean, he's upside down because he lied about, or misrepresented his involvement with being shot at in a helicopter. But for some I guess a politician, it's not that far a reach to assume that they might fabricate something. But your military records, my God, if there's anything more sacred to do, the disposition and sending people to and from war, or sending people to war, the VA and all
Or
of those
supporting
things,
them when they come back.
and supporting when they get back. I mean, that's ought to be the backbone of our. It's certainly, it ought to be a nonpartisan, and to lie about that is really despicable.
It's tragic, and frankly, it's disgusting.
It is disgusting.
And I think that's something that, I mean, every veteran I talk to, that's
Yeah.
that's a universally held belief that if you're, especially if you're profiting, like someone who runs for office, based on the fact you said, and I'm a veteran, and people put trust in veterans, at least in this decade, they're held in high esteem, and to use that and abuse that trust is
to
awful.
personally benefit is
against the brotherhood and everything that we fought
Absolutely.
and earned. We had to earn that.
Right, politician or not.
Yeah.
It's
You have to earn that respect among your men and among the people you're with. And boy, that's not to be taken lightly. And this guy did. And I hope he resigns or is driven out. I don't know what the disposition is, but
we'll see.
Well, and if the public tolerates that, then we've really hit a low.
And I think you hit on it, that it chips away at that trust, that especially as Vietnam veterans,
Yeah.
Better than anybody, it's taken us 30 years to rebuild that trust, and through no fault of your own. This was a war that was unpopular, especially for those guys that were drafted, those men and women, or those men that were drafted into service to come back to, an ungrateful nation. It took a long time for us to heal those wounds, and this type of self-aggrandizement and exaggeration of who you are and what you've done, that's the kind of thing that takes away piece by piece that trust that we've built.
And
it reflects poorly on all of us then.
Yeah,
I think, and
I would agree.
that's what does it. You've continued your advocacy and your connection with veterans, and have been quite successful in helping to connect that community also with the non-veteran community. Give us a little flavor of what you've done in and around the veterans community here in the great state of Arizona.
Sure. One of the pieces that I'm most proud of, I actually worked with TriWest, who used to handle the TRICARE contract for the entire Western United States, on putting together an employer program to highlight those employers that are hiring veterans, and not just hiring them, but having a veteran supportive environment. And then we put together a campaign to get those businesses to reach out to other, I don't want to say not supportive businesses, not veteran supportive, but people that just hadn't heard about or didn't know how to take care of veterans, and say what a great resource we are. And and by the way, this is how you find them and take care of them, and nurture all the great things that veterans can bring to a company. And before that, or after that, excuse me, working with Madison Street Veterans Association, the Homeless Veterans Transitional Living Center.
Tell us about that, because I know Bob Brown, the past president of Catholic Charities, is really enamored with Manna House and all the work that goes on there. And I think David is involved with them in housing with Catholic Charities. Is that right?
Yeah, we've been talking with them for a few weeks, few months.
Speaking of Irish Catholics here at the table, or French, whatever they may be.
Oui.
Yeah.
No, that's you're exactly right. They are working with Catholic Charities, and they're a great organization.
Well, what did they do?
They're a transitional living center that supports veterans only. They have about, I think last count, there were about 48 beds. So it's kind of dorm style but the key is that one of the problems with veterans and homelessness is there's all sorts of pressure from the government to get a veteran housed. So that's declaring victory. We got them into the housing, so scratch that off the books.
Sure.
Whereas Madison Street comes from a more, I hate to use the word holistic, but a holistic look at what's going on with a veteran, that just putting him in a house, that's the symptom. That's, homelessness is the symptom of all the other stuff that's going on. So if you're not taking care of their legal problems, their emotional challenges, their, educational issues, whatever it takes to get you to that point, so that when you get into that home, that you are able to stay, that was the key. And if there's any key metric for success, it's a low recidivism rate. People aren't coming back through like a revolving door. Madison Street typically had around an 80% non-recidivism rate.
Oh, that's
which is
pretty good.
Apples to apples comparison. I won't say other organizations, but there are some organizations in Arizona that hover in the 40s and 30s.
David and I have been talking about why is it that there's so many veterans organizations helping veterans? Why are there so many people, veterans, needing help, and why isn't the nation providing that help? Does that strike you as something being kind of unjust?
I would say it's unjust in hindsight. If you look at where we were, again, going to war back in 2002, that we weren't prepared necessarily for those wars, and that included the VA. We didn't have the support structure ready. After Vietnam, there just wasn't the political will to put a bunch of money into the VA to take care of Vietnam era veterans. And now we've added, so we still needed to take care of that issue on top of a whole new generation of veterans. So you're looking at trying to ramp that up in 10 years. And we're talking about the government, not known for their swiftness at dealing with problems or their efficiency.
But it strikes me as, we did Vietnam. I mean, I've taken courses and all of that and looked at it as a case study. And that, there's enough information there to learn how not to do it again, how to not send people to war, how to not bring them home, how to, fight a war of insurgency, or how not to get involved. All those lessons were learned. And yet the callousness and the hubris and of how we went to Iraq is exasperating to look at. And the result of that, not only the whole Middle East is upside down. I mean, there's millions of refugees now, not to mention the people we've killed. That whole Middle East is upside down. And the people who started this were so callous, it seems, and so not with it intellectually, it seems. And they had no compunction about, it was like a raise of the hand, and they did this Gulf of, I'm going to say Gulf of Tonkin, but
yeah, but so we find ourselves behind the curve again.
Well, not only behind the curve, so those guys who got out, they're writing books. Bush is back painting pictures down on some ranch, and here we got Manna House taking care of the residue of that failure, and no one looks at the injustice and the immorality of that, throwing people into harm's way and then bringing them back and letting them crash on the streets. It doesn't seem right,
I mean, the one thing that I think, back to how I think veterans perceive war, that we hope for, especially as people who can't advocate for or against, as an officer, my job, this, Joe, was to, whatever the commander-in-chief says, you're essentially echoing it, right? So when people would ask me, what do you think of the Iraq war? I said, I'm in support of whatever the commander-in-chief says, but it's on you voters to decide whether we're going to a just or unjust war. It's on Congress to decide whether wars are just or unjust. And back to the original point about Vietnam, chips away at that trust when we don't go to wars that we can say, this is the right war and this is the right thing to do. And it's worth all the sacrifices, the deaths, and all of the work that we have to do to take care of these people that a lot of them can be, impacted for the rest of their lives by their service.
Well,
that's worthwhile.
Well, boy, David and I have got body counts that we have to think about. I mean, we were right there. My job was to get the count.
Wow.
I had to kill people to justify us being there, and
It was all about the count.
it was all about the count. But it was all about, we didn't want to, as an artillery observer and forward air controller, we wanted to kill as many as them coming across to protect the Americans so we could get the hell out of there. We didn't want to be, you don't want to be the last guy killed in a war that shouldn't have been fought. So,
Right.
Well, we struggle with that. I mean, I still do. And I see it happen again. And I see the politicians off writing books, and now they're coming back with, we were right, and, opining about why they did what they did. And we know for a fact they were wrong. I mean, academically, the jury's in.
Right.
And
Can you spell ISIS?
can you spell? But the American public doesn't seem, we're not electing the right people to take care of our sons and daughters. I said in a speech on Memorial Day, I don't know if, the politicians have not demonstrated that they're worthy of the sacrifice of the veteran. The guys are putting it on their line. They're not worthy of it, quite frankly, by the fact that this bozo ran for office. And, we have a lot of bozos in there for themselves. And the veterans are there for each other. It's a big difference.
Right. One of the things that I always say to politicians when I talk to them about whether or not they're veteran supportive, and if they're talking about going to war, is are you willing to kill people for what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Put it in that way in your head,
Yeah.
because that's you're asking these people that are willingly going off
Yes.
to potentially die. Is what you're saying about this war worth people dying?
And your son dying, or your neighbor's
Yes.
son dying. Is it worth that? If you think it's worth that, then raise your hand. And if you can't answer that, then by gosh, let's have a debate. But
Couldn't agree more.
don't hide behind some friggin' voice vote. Listen, we're getting all ramped up here in the Veterans Heritage Hour. Truth, justice, in the American way. By gosh, stay tuned and we'll figure this out.
Veterans served us, now it's time we serve them. As a veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as a current military member deployed abroad, I would like to take a minute of your time to tell you about Patriot Hills of New York. Patriot Hills of New York is a nonprofit organization providing support to veterans and their families. They partner veterans in need with over 65 health and wellness organizations, community groups, as well as philanthropic foundations providing no or low-cost services. They've helped over 400 veterans through confidential referral services, assistance with veterans issues, employment placement, as well as educational opportunities. If you need assistance or just want to help veterans by donating your time or services, contact them at info@patriothills.org. Again, that's info@patriothills.org. Visit patriothillsofnewyork.com for more information about their services or how you can donate. Our veterans deserve no less. We can give it to them, and you can help. Everyone's going to need an attorney at some point in their life. I'm no different. Hey everyone, it's James from Vets On. Whether it was my last will and testament before deployment or my ongoing custody battle for my children during my divorce, I needed help, so I lawyered up. If you need help, I urge you to contact Capstrom Law Firm. Capstrom Law Firm in Springfield, Missouri services clients throughout the state in criminal law, personal injury, and family law. With over 13 years practicing law, Tom Capstrom understands both law and court procedures and how stressful they can be. Let Tom Capstrom Law Firm and his dedicated staff take the stress and worry out of a difficult situation by calling him today. We feel so strong about the work that Tom and his staff are doing that he'll be a monthly guest on the show. Tom is a veteran and a listener, for God's sake, so you know the guy is solid and will fight for you. Give Tom a call today by calling 417-864-0552. Or email Tom at capstromlaw.com. And don't forget to tell him that Vets On sent you.
The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely upon advertising.
If you or someone you know is looking for a new job or career, you need to visit the pros. National Career Fairs at ncfairs.com. National Career Fairs hosts over 300 career fairs a year nationwide. The events are free and give you the perfect chance to meet some of the top employers in your area face to face. To find the nearest career fair to you, visit ncfairs.com. Again, that's ncfairs.com. What are you waiting for?
You're listening to the Veterans Heritage Hour on the Vets On Media Network.
Hey, we're back, and I'm with David Lucer and our guest, Corey Harris. Corey, we were talking about Manor House and your involvement with legislative issues. What are you working on now? What is your job now?
So one of my primary jobs, I'm working with a group called the Unified Arizona Veterans that brings all the veteran community together to communicate with each other and advocate for change in the state of Arizona. And I'm their legislative liaison. So my job is to go to the state legislature and say, this is what the veteran community wants in terms of veteran supportive legislation.
Is that Mike Mullins' model that you copied?
No, it's not. But it's maybe kind of a portion of it in that it does help bring all these various communities together and helps speak out in one voice or a singular voice. And that's kind of what Corey's been doing. Could you give us an example of what makes up a piece of, what makes up a piece of legislation that may have, high impact? Give us an example of some of the things you've been working on.
Sure. A great example, one of the things that we're working on in Arizona is the issue that, unfortunately, what I was talking about earlier, the post 9/11 GI Bill was built to last for 4.5 years, assuming that a veteran would be able to get done with their schooling within that 4.5 years. Well, the truth, it fell a little bit far from that. They're actually averaging about 5.5 to 6 years. So in Arizona, we were looking for a way to cover that last year to make sure that they get to graduation. Because the last thing you want is a veteran coming up on his senior year going, oh, geez, I don't have any money. I've got to take out loans that I didn't plan for, or ask family for help, or go back to work, when they've already put, they're already in some respects behind their peers in that they graduated at 22, 23, and 24. Well, that's when a veteran usually starts his educational career. Mm-hmm. So they're coming out at the age of 28, 29, and the key is get them through and get them to graduation. And that's one of the things we.
And these are folks who are on track to graduate.
Right. This isn't a blank check.
This isn't a blank check, and it's not a concept that helps enable a veteran, but it's really an investment in a veteran.
Right. And yes, and that's I think that's a key piece of helping out our veterans at the macro level. But I think one of the things that Arizona is actually doing very well at, and there's some legislation that we can work on to help this, is actually getting the veteran community to self-police, to agree on standards of care and in all the different areas, education, employment, health and wellness, and to get them to say what are the standards that we can all agree on to make sure these veterans are successful in their reintegration. As I'm sure you guys can attest, David, I know you've been around plenty of these guys that come in and see federal dollars and say, I've never worked with a veteran a day in my life. I don't know how to help them, but I have this great solution that's going to take care of the veteran community. And so
private universities, have you encountered them in your
yes.
legislative?
Yeah, that we have.
In fact, funny thing, back to the post 9/11 GI Bill, they actually had to put in a control for the private universities that were abusing the post 9/11 GI Bill. Basically, they were heavily recruiting veterans, with what do you call it, like call center type tactics.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, where they would pressure them. You'd have to call them 7 times before and take 7 no's before you can stop calling a veteran. Once they click on the website that says you're allowed to, I'm interested in getting my college education, and which wouldn't be so bad if they weren't taking care of them on the back end. They weren't seeing them through to graduation. In fact, one notable university, I use the term university lightly, was
is there a football stadium named
there? There is a football stadium. Mm-hmm. They actually pushed veterans to stay in longer, because every veteran that used the GI Bill, that meant 9 more students that could get federal funding. So they saw it as a dollar multiplier. Every veteran came in with a big dollar sign stamped on their forehead. So they would make sure that they couldn't get the classes they were getting and would stay in longer to maximize their dollars.
And we know that.
We do know that.
Wow.
But luckily, the law's been changed, and to be fair, that university has made a lot of strides to try to improve after it was pointed out that they were taking advantage of veterans.
So that was the Obama administration was also on that.
That's correct.
And they got involved with that heavily to change the GI Bill, the private school portion of that, correct?
Absolutely. That's right.
Did you guys drive that to the national level? Was that, were you part of it?
I was not. There were people that I advised in Congress to do that, but I wasn't a part of the actual. I wasn't working for a congressman at the time, so I wasn't part of the actual effort.
So we're looking, and you brought up the Joe. You brought up the idea, the model that Admiral Mullen had constructed, and it involved education, it involved jobs, and it involved wellness. And here in Arizona, I think. Corey, tell us a little bit about the wellness side of things when it comes to suicide prevention, when it comes to housing, when it comes to TBI, PTSD, those sorts of things.
Sure. I think, and this is nationally happening, that everybody is basically throwing a bunch of arrows at a dartboard trying to figure out what we can do to help veterans with PTSD or that are either contemplating or potentially, sadly, tried to commit suicide. And, because the traditional model, if I can be frank, of let's give them some drugs and they'll be fine, isn't working.
Or some counseling from one of their.
And some counseling, right? And to be fair, I'm not saying that those are the only things, but there was a lot of effort to look at alternative methods. The problem is there wasn't a whole lot of science behind it. It was anecdotal. It was veterans love this, so let's have ostrich therapy, or let's have,
swim with the dolphin.
Right. Makeup therapy, whatever
Raise
it was.
a goldfish.
And
Right.
kill it, right? Just to see if you can survive the trauma.
Hair therapy. Who knows?
Kill the goldfish.
Hair therapy. That's what I need, hair therapy.
And that's the problem. And I think that's something that Arizona, especially in the mental health field, they've gotten different groups together. There are studies that go on. They base it on science, looking at what is actually beneficial to veterans and how to get them through.
So I've been at this for years, and I didn't know I had an issue until my wife saw me playing golf.
Wives are good that way.
Yeah, well, I wasn't married at the time, and I might have had an issue or so, and I quit. I thought I quit drinking years ago, thinking that was it. Well, that wasn't even close. So looking at this, it is someone knows there's a group of people out there in the Defense Department or somewhere who knows, right? Because when you get in the military, they test you like crazy, right? So they know all of that. And when you get out, they know who you are. They test, and so they know. And so somebody's got to know who the people are who get PTSD. Who are they? Is there some commonality? There's statistics out there that someone knows and we're not hearing from, or they're investigating through some private research or something. But there's some knowledge out there. Wouldn't you think?
There is knowledge out there. The problem is because of how overwhelmed the VA and all sorts of support services are. There traditionally hasn't been the capacity to go out and say, let's help these new veterans, or let's make sure that they're getting into the VA. So it's more passive getting the veterans in than saying, let's actively go after these people. I mean, honestly, the step of let's analyze who's coming out and take care of those individuals before it becomes a problem. It is a worthy goal, and we need to get there, but we're about 3 steps shy.
Well, that's a good point. And in the 4 minutes I think that we have left, let's talk a little bit about what you see in the future. How do we make these improvements? What can we do to be better? What can we do to come up maybe with number one, better policy, but number two, on the back end, how do we better serve these our human assets and resources that have been put through these ordeals?
Sure.
What do you see?
Part of the challenge, as you both know, is getting the military itself to discuss these things frankly with their soldiers. And to be fair, the military has changed a lot just in the time that I was in terms of allowing veterans to understand that they might have some challenges when they get out. I remember when I first would go to suicide prevention classes, they would always talk about, this is what to look out for in your buddy. They would never talk about, and oh, by the way, if you're experiencing suicidal thoughts, this is how, the idea is it's someone else's problem. We don't talk about our issues. And that is changing, to be fair. There is still ways to go on that, but I think that's very positive. If we continue that sustained effort, for the future of the military. The other piece, and this is a specific piece of legislation that really needs to go through, we've got to be able to register people coming out of the military in the VA and transfer their medical records over automatically. Not that the veteran has to go to the VA, but as we've seen with a lot of the Vietnam era veterans, when they got out, they may have felt great, or they didn't want to ask for help. And only 10 years down the road, when they have a failed marriage and they have, they've been in and out of treatment, or they have legal issues, they go, oh, maybe that did affect me, and maybe I need to get some help. And then they go back and they say, great, where's your paperwork? And that veteran doesn't have anything to produce.
Well, no one knows that they're jammed up and when they get home. I mean, you're so happy just processing the whole thing. You don't know you're jammed up until somewhere down the line. I was in grad school in Minnesota, flopping on the floor for firecrackers, and the firecrackers go down. I was in a classroom. I took my whole desk and everything over. Somebody set off a string of firecrackers outside the classroom, right? And I took my whole desk and I was trying to jam my head between the baseboard heater and the floor, right? They know a little space
Right.
like that. And I got up and I was, twitching around a little bit. And I went to see the doctor the next day at the school, right? And I said, hey, I got this twitching thing. I got this, what do you got? You got a pill for this? He says, you're going to need a psychiatrist. You need to talk to a counselor. I said, I ain't going to happen, right? I mean, I was not going to talk to anybody, right? But I thought there was a pill you could take to end all this stuff. Hey, we got 2 minutes left. How do you want to end this thing? On a happy note, David, or?
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, on a positive outlook, and I think Corey, you've been doing a great job, along with several other veteran advocates here in the state, not only in the state but nationally, working for veterans, by veterans, and really pulling their weight and then some to help improve the outcomes after service. And tip of the beret to you, my man. It's
I like
been,
that.
it's
Thank
been,
you.
it's
Tip
been,
of the beret. That's a high compliment coming from David.
For Mr. Special Forces.
Mr. Special Forces. I thought he was Mr. Special Forces till I met Rich Carmona.
That's fair.
He is
That's
Mr.
fair.
And we had General Friedovich on, the 3-star general. He is, I guess all three of them tip of the beret, man. There's something.
Funny thing, you guys might appreciate this. I actually had to stand in for Dr. Carmona when he was going to be honored at a Veterans Day event, and it was at the Talking Stick Resort.
Uh-huh.
And I got there, last minute, and they get me set up, and they have me standing there, and I'm on the Jumbotron, and they start introducing me. But they don't introduce me as Corey Harris standing in for Dr. Carmona. They introduced me as Dr. Carmona. Now, again, I look like I'm 12.
Sure.
Dr. Carmona was in Vietnam. So I've got my hand up, and they said, and this is Dr. Carmona, and he went to Vietnam, Special Forces, former U.S. Surgeon General, running for U.S. Senate. And I've just got to smile, and maybe this is the detriment of working with politicians. I just smiled through it and said, yep, that's me.
Stolen valor, man.
There it is.
Somebody ought to be hanging you up. Rich Carmona, by the way, still looks like he's 25 or so. He's aged gracefully. Are we out of here, Birdman? So who's going to take us out? Dave Bray?
Madison Rising.
Dave Bray is going to take us out, Madison Rising. Stay tuned for next week. We hope we have Ruben Gallego calling in, the Congressman, Marine Trigger Puller.
Thanks again, Corey Harris.
Thanks for having me.
again, and thank you all for listening. This is the Veterans Heritage Hour. We're out of here.
Oh, say, can you